Krav Life. Today I got a special guest with me, Mr. Paul Landreth-Smith. How are you doing, sir?
Hello, how are you?
Good, good, good. So let's talk a little bit about yourself, right? And kind of like how you got started with everything. Did you was Krav Maga your first art, or so to speak, or the first thing you were in, or did you have history before that?
Well, I'm old, so so I first got into martial arts as a result of fairly typical early 90s, late 80s, in fact, late 80s, if I'm being honest, movies. So we're talking Jean-Claude Van Damme, kickboxer, Bloodsport, that kind of thing. And I was like, oh, I want to do that. And in the United Kingdom at the time, now, technically speaking, Krav Maga existed, but it was so far on the fringe that it wasn't on anybody's radar. You had to be like seriously nerdish to even know what it was. So in the UK, the mainstream martial arts available was judo and karate stroke taekwondo. That was basically it. And the biggest kind of events were freestyle karate stroke taekwondo tournaments. So if you wanted to compete, or if you wanted to get in that the martial arts scene, as it were, you're talking freestyle karate, taekwondo, and then more towards the fringe, you've got judo, Muay Thai, and then further out, you've got everybody else. So I got into taekwondo and kickboxing. Kickboxing because I thought it was cooler than taekwondo, but then I got into taekwondo as well. I did that extensively for a lot of years. And that started my martial arts journey, which hasn't ended because it's an ongoing process. But currently now, my main kind of intellectual focus is Krav Maga.
Okay. And how did that transition happen? How did you go from Taekwondo, kickboxing into Krav Maga?
So like I said, I've been training in Taekwondo, kickboxing extensively for a number of years. I competed successfully. I got a little bit into boxing. I cross-trained with Muay Thai, but it was all kind of striking arts. And then in the early 90s, there was a show, a promotion, a marketing exercise, an extremely successful marketing exercise by a family called the Gracies, which some people may have heard of, which was called the Ultimate Fighting Championships. And that kind of blew up, and I realized, hey, I want to have a look at this because I'm a fairly decent striker, but I have zero ground game whatsoever. And here was a man who at the time was the lightest competitor, and he was winning against all these world-class strikers. So I got into BJJ and MMA, and I got the bug for that. I continue to have the bug for that. And I had a number of successful academies at the time. I had hundreds of students, and I was teaching a hybrid. I was doing what everybody did. I was teaching the curriculum, and then people come and they learn martial arts because they want to learn how to take care of themselves. So I was teaching an adaptation of all the sport skills that I had for the street, a lot of which was based on my experiences as a police officer at the time. And then in 2005, I was introduced to a gentleman called Ernie Kirk, who is one of the original US Krav Maga exponents. He's been involved in it from the very start. And he showed me Krav Maga. And everything kind of went clunk into place because he formalized within a curriculum all the things that I was already teaching, because I was stripping away the unnecessary elements of martial arts, of the elements from sport competition which are inappropriate or won't work. when there are no rules, or when there's more than one opponent, or when you involve weapons, or any number of other variables that you wish to introduce. And yeah, I got introduced to Krav Maga through Ernie Kirk, and it'd be wrong to say it blew my mind, because it wasn't mind blowing. It was almost like, oh, finally. So rather than kind of trying to explain to people, oh, you know, I have this system which I teach, and it's based on my own experiences, and this is what works, and this is taking elements from these styles, because by that time I trained in Taekwondo, kickboxing, Muay Thai, boxing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, traditional Jiu-Jitsu, Aikido, and I was kind of, I'd gone to train with a little bit of Kung Fu. I'd done all these little bits, and I was kind of taking little pieces here and there and kind of making them into this organic, evolving, this is how Paul thinks it should work. And then finally, boom, there we go. Now we have a system, which I don't need to kind of try and market as myself. I can call it a name. And that was Krav Maga. So that was really refreshing to say, oh, it's not just me. There's other people out there that are trying to do this.
Nice. And so you said, like, you had your own studio, and that was in the UK?
Yes. So I had a 4 schools, kind of 4.5. I was heavily connected to a university at the time, so I had 2 clubs for each system. So there were a university taekwondo club, which is only open to taekwondo students from the university, but then I had a parallel public class for taekwondo, and the same thing with kickboxing. So I had a kickboxing club and a parallel public kickboxing club. So I had 4 schools that were running, and they all kind of cross-trained with each other. There were a lot of people that did all 4 classes. Some people just remained loyal to one, but essentially I managed a team of instructors, and I had my role, and yeah.
And were you a police officer at the same time as you had these studios, or was that before or after?
No, that was all at the same time. So that was why I had a team of instructors, because with my shifts and everything, I couldn't make all the classes. It wasn't a full-time gig for me. It was a part-time thing, and I had a team of instructors who had their own strengths and their own abilities, and I would swoop in and attend classes as and when I was able, but I would manage it so that they ran the classes, and then I would come in and work my way through and run gradings and run events and so on and so forth. Set the curriculum, make sure everything is working. All the boring stuff about running a martial arts academy that nobody sees, but it's like, oh, it takes so much time. Like, the teaching is easy. You just turn up, you teach, do your thing, you're gone. But there's all that stuff in the background that has to be done, and that was mainly what I was doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so you were a police officer, and that was in the UK. Can you tell us a little bit about like kind of what you did as a police officer, like what branch you were with?
So everyone, when they join the police, they have to start off as patrol, and I did that for 5 years. So I was a patrol officer. I had the big hat that people comically think of the police wearing, and they do wear. And that was with hindsight, one of the best times that I ever had, because it was exciting, it was new, and I was young. I started when I was 23, so like 23 to 28 years old. And you respond spontaneously to calls from the public. So, you're just going to whatever. And of course, in the United Kingdom, police officers don't carry guns.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a different style of policing. It's not better or worse. It's just the way it is over there. And I guess as a result of that, we would go hands-on regularly. And this was one of the issues that I had with traditional martial arts and what is typically taught within classes and the realities of combat, because I was being thrust into confrontational situations, which weren't always fighting. Sometimes they were verbal. Sometimes it was primary control, so just kind of holding somebody. Sometimes you control and restraint. Sometimes you were fighting all out, just duking it out, which I know Americans in particular are just like, you were doing what? That's just what it's like as an English police officer. If it's you and, you turn up to a domestic incident, say between a couple, and the guy's drunk and he decides he's going to fight you, then you fight. Or this used to be like that. I'm not sure what it's like now. This is like oh gosh, I'm so old. This is like 30 years ago. And then from there, I went into what was called operational support, which is a euphemism for riot police. So we would travel around in a gang. This is not the best word, but in a crew of 9 officers plus a sergeant. So there'd be 10 of us, and we would deploy to spontaneous disorder or likely disorder. So like Thursday, Friday, Saturday night in any British town, there are going to be fights. There's going to be trouble in the pubs, in the clubs. It's just the way the British are, I guess. They drink. So the average British male, when he goes out, he wants to drink to excess. He wants to dance. He wants to talk to girls. He wants to have a curry at the end of the night. And at some point during the night, he's not that averse to having a bit of a punch up with somebody. So we would go in and try to prevent that kind of thing happening. We also went to all the football games. We went to any incident where we thought there was going to be potential for problems, and I was in that for 3 years. And while I was in that, I also graduated to becoming part of the firearms response teams, which they have over there. So the way it works in the UK, I would admit, I don't know, 99% of police officers are not armed. But the 1 or 2% who are armed are trained to a comparatively high standard compared to, say, other countries. Mm-hmm. So the armed officers are all kind of SWAT, although that isn't a term that's used in the UK. And then within that there are different levels. And I began as what's called an authorized firearms officer on a armed response vehicle, an ARV. So it was always a 2-person car. And then we would hear of spontaneous problems. We would link in with another car. We'd go to a problem. And of course, it was all over by the time we got there more often than not. But then I graduated up into the proactive team. So we would get intelligence that there were particular individuals who were either using firearms, in possession of firearms, or about to do naughty things. And we would try and intervene before things happened. And then I graduated again into what's called a CTSFO. So it's a counterterrorism specialist firearms officer. And the best way to describe that is a service provider to other agencies. So you have major crime, you have various drug enforcement agencies, you have kidnap units, you've got MI5 who work within Homeland Security, counterterrorism, and they would produce packages of intelligence, and then they get to an arrest phase or an intervention phase, and they have no capability of their own. They would come to us and say, okay, these are very bad people, can you go and resolve the situation? And then we would go, and we had a broad range of capabilities, from marine assaults, helicopter fast roping, hostage rescue, CQC, dovetailing with the military, depending on the event and the seriousness of what was going on. So 18-year career, starting off with my big hat, literally walking the streets, and ending being an instructor and operator for the London Metropolitan CTSFO teams.
And somehow you ended up in Texas.
Somehow, well, it wasn't that hard. So what you do, it's quite straightforward. What you do is you marry a Texan, and then a certain period of time later, we lived in the UK for a couple of years. It was good, but then because of various reasons, personal, political, financial, we decided it was in our interests to relocate to Texas, which is what we did. And with hindsight, that was the right decision. I don't know how much your audience pays attention to things like Brexit Just, that was a stupid move. But anyway, so for the last 8 years, I've been in Texas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, we do have a lot of listeners in the UK, and I'm sure they probably agree with you.
Some of them will, some of them don't. Yeah, I don't think it's working out quite as smoothly as some of the Leave people might have hoped. But it's certainly if you're a police officer in the United Kingdom, we always call it the job, but the job that I joined in 1995 it's very different to how it is now, and I probably wouldn't survive the way that we policed back in the day. Very different to how things are done now. So, yeah.
Okay. And so now you got married. You eventually moved to Texas, and I'm assuming that you continued to progress with your Krav Maga training.
Yes.
And okay, can you tell us a little bit more about like how that progressed, and then you eventually became you're the director for Krav Maga Universal, correct?
That's right. So what was happening was my instructor Ernie Kirk, based out of Pennsylvania. So I was either flying to Pennsylvania and training with him, or he would come to United Kingdom as part of a training exercise. But I also hooked up with, say hooked up, you have to be careful, what that means. I began training with my dog wants to play. There's a guy called Joe Ambrosino who's based out of London, and while I was living and working in London, I was training with him, and he's a superb Krav Maga instructor, really, really knowledgeable. He's a Brazilian. Hang on, I have to get this right. Yeah, he's from Brazil, but his family's Italian. It's all very complicated. But anyway, it's a typical London thing. He's got the Institute of Krav Maga over there, and he and I hit it off immediately. So my Krav Maga kind of journey with the student-instructor relationship that really accelerated while I was living in London for 4 years. Then I came to Texas. So I've been a student and an instructor for 3 different organizations. So you've got Premier Martial Arts, who was the original organization that I was with. That was who I first met Ernie Kirk with. Then I became an instructor at, I say 4 organizations. So then I became an instructor, member of KMG, which is a large Krav Maga organization all around the world under Eyal Yanilov. I did their GIC program in London. Then I moved to Texas, and where I am living in Tyler, Texas. They had, it's no longer an affiliate, but they had an alliance Krav Maga. So Krav Maga Alliance through John Whitman, who split off from Worldwide. So I became a Krav Maga Alliance member and instructor, but I was always, the constant has always been Ernie. So I would always be traveling up to see Ernie, when I could. And then really, in the more recent years, it's my focus has been through KMU. So Ernie, who's also a breakaway from Worldwide, and has since parted ways with Premier. And KMU is Ernie Kirk plus helpers like me. So I'm one of his directors. I help him to run the show. I help to facilitate instructor training. So I don't so much teach students. I don't have a club of my own at the moment, but what I do is I help to teach other instructors how to teach Krav Maga, and I am very heavily involved in large training events that we host throughout the year in various locations around the United States.
And so that would be an event kind of like a Krav Camp, correct?
Exactly like Krav Camp. So usually what we've had up to this year, we've had 2. We've had one in Pennsylvania, one in Texas. This year we had one more in Virginia. So we are slowly expanding. There's been some interest from Colorado from a couple of people, so that might be a thing in 2022. We'll see how that works out. But the two mainstays are Pennsylvania and Texas. Pennsylvania, because that's where Ernie is, and Texas, that's where I am, and they're kind of far away. So we get different groups of people. Some people go to both, but typically you have the Pennsylvania crowd and you have the Texas crowd, and we try to replicate each camp so that everyone's kind of cycling through and having the same experience.
Can you tell us about some of the events at Krav Camp? Let's start with like this year's camp. What are some of the things that are upcoming?
Okay, so we've actually played with the idea of removing the name Krav because it can be a barrier, because you know what the politics of martial arts are like, and we're very open. We're very much we don't care what style you do, who you train under, what your lineage is. If you're interested in realistic self-protection, that whole umbrella, then we want you to come. And International Krav Camp was just kind of like a useful term. We use it because most of the people that come to train with us have got some kind of Krav Maga affiliation, but that isn't a prerequisite. But some people go, oh, it's Krav Maga, we don't want to train with them, or we want to do this. So we kind of played with that. But anywho, what we do, we kind of have three areas which all blend into each other. So you have unarmed. So that's what people think about with Krav Maga or any realistic defensive combat system. And we bring in different instructors with different skill sets and different backgrounds, because it's not the gospel according to Ernie and Paul. It's what works for other people, and we learn as well every time we host these things. So you've got the unarmed stuff, which bleeds into weapons like knives and sticks, and firearms, disarms and things like that. But it's typically how to fight. And we've also found in recent years a hugely popular involvement with the BJJ community, because one of the things that Krav Maga typically lacks, not always, I have to be careful how I word this, but one of the things that typical Krav Maga curriculum lacks is a comprehensive ground fighting element. It seems to be kind of, you just kind of flip them off you and then you stand up, and it's like, okay, let's see you do that for reals when someone's trying not to. So in the last couple of years, really, we've always had some very strong BJJ elements, and we try to strip away some of the BJJ-ness, if that makes sense. So a lot of BJJ is just one-on-one.
Yeah.
And it's a fair fight between two guys. Their friends aren't kicking the other guy in the head. You're not being stabbed. So we try to keep that real. Then we have a lot of firearms training. So there's a lot of people there that we bring in who have different backgrounds, whether it be from the military or from the police or from competitive shooting. So this year, for example, we've got Ryan Hubbard, who is an ex-USA Olympic pistol shooter. Mm-hmm. And he's got great skills. We've got a couple of cops, myself included, who are SWAT team members, and we bring in guys who've served in the Marines, and we bring everybody together. We kind of show civilian-based ways to use your firearm in a defensive capability, but we make it fun and competitive, as it were. And then finally, there's what happens afterwards. What happens when the dust settles and you're checking yourself and you find that you're injured, or you find that someone else is injured, or just everyday life. You come across a wreck or something. So that protection umbrella, and we've really started to push the first aid, and we've strayed away from tactical first aid because that has its own baggage, and we've not rebranded it, but made it more applicable. We call it the immediate aftermath, or the things you have to do in that time period when you, as a civilian who isn't a medical professional and isn't operating under the guidelines of the medical director, and you're not operating in a theatre of war, which changes things dramatically. So it's what you can do realistically within the time frames in order for you to get a definitive care somewhere else. And that's not just injuries. We focus on common things like heart attacks, stroke, diabetic emergencies, and things like that. So we've got that whole protection coverage from fighting, shooting, rolling around on the ground fighting, and first aid.
Cool. And so what are some of the highlights of past Krav camps? Like, what are some of the cool things that that you guys have done at different camps?
Oh gosh. So we have. So the last camp we just had, we experimented with very popular a tactical games element. So we train people up how to be safe with the firearms, and then it's called tactical games. It's basically like you run around and you do things that exert you, whether it be carrying logs or carrying weights or just sprinting up and down hills, and then you have to shoot because you think you're a good shot, but when you're physically exhausted, suddenly you're not a good shot, and that in some way replicates the stress of real shooting.
Mm-hmm.
We do force on force, where you use simunition or similar platforms. So we set up scenarios and people go in blind. Like there's no, okay, so this scenario, this is going to happen. We just go, nope. Just, you're going to go and buy gas. And we set up something, and then funny enough, something happens, of course. And you have to make these shoot, no shoot decisions, because when you talk to people within the self-protection community, and by that I mean the broader self-protection community, there's a lot of people within the United States, and their entire self-protection plan is, well, I carry a gun. And it's quite disturbing, actually, because it's like, well, that isn't a plan. That's a tool that you have available to you, which could make things worse if you're going into confrontation and you bring a gun and you don't know how to protect it, and you can't defend someone taking it from you and using it against you. So you could make it worse. And the shoot no shoot scenarios are always a really good one, because people have to think, well, I can't just, I'm not sure what the threat is, so I have to do something else, or I've negated the threat.
Mm.
Is it still justifiable for me to keep pointing my gun at someone, or their gun at them? Like, I've just taken their gun off them. Am I now justified in using lethal force against them? The threat of lethal force. There's all these imponderables, and some people are going to be like, well, of course, but every situation is its own, and we like people to think. So we have a lot of things like that. We also have had there's a fantastic asset that we have, a young lady called Donna, and she brings in some of the best moulage I've ever seen. I've been working, so I'm a paramedic right now. I was a team medic on my team in the UK, so I have some experience of medical training and how it's done. And she brings in makeup and props that replicate injuries, and they're so good that almost without exception, and I don't just mean civilians who attend the courses, but professionals, so like law enforcement, nurses, they walk in and they do this, as they look, and they're like, oh, that looks really realistic, broken bones, impaled objects, massive head bleeds. And we set up a scenario, and it could be we've had ATV rollovers where multiple people are injured. We've had a oxyacetylene tank in a shop blew up 4 people, and they're all got impaled objects and things, and they're like, ah. So you've got your sucking chest wounds, your head traumas, your major bleeds, and it's we're training people how to triage them and help. So those are the kind of events that really get people talking.
That sounds pretty cool. That'd be fun. And so when you said you had 3 camps this year, you had in Virginia, and then the Texas one, did that happen already? or
the Texas one is always in the beginning of February, so like the first weekend of February, because it's Texas and it's still pleasant in Texas, relatively speaking, compared to say Pennsylvania, it's all snowed in. I say that, but we had Snowmageddon, as they call it around here this year. Texans don't do well with snow. There is no infrastructure in Texas for snow, so we had a week of snow, which I know to the more northern states, yourself included, you'd be like, okay, a week, big deal, but it crippled Texas. Completely threw us off. Anyway, so we have the Texas camp's about February. Pennsylvania camp is in August. So we've got it the third week of August, the 16th, 17th, 18th, something like that. And yeah, I'd have to check. And then we just had the Virginia camp, which which I say was our first foray into that. Oh no, the Texas camp is the 20th, the 21st, and 22nd of August. And Virginia camp was last month in June. So we're kind of playing with that second location to see how we're going to run that. Whether maybe we go back to Virginia, or it may be that we have like a third one that kind of roams around and goes to different locations. We'll see.
As long as it's not Florida. Okay. So do you have any plans to start your own Krav studio?
No, not right now. I'm very much engaged with being a paramedic. So my full-time job is on a truck, answering calls, driving around. I've still got that first responder bug, I guess. I also work as an EMS educator, so I train other people how to either be EMTs or paramedics. And then the Krav Maga stroke firearms is my side thing, which I do as like a hobby, and because I feel passionately about it. So if there are people who want to further their education in that regard, no, I don't. It's not just a kind of, this is going to sound elitist, I guess, but it is what it is. But if there are people who just have this kind of vague, I'd like to train. Well, I will point you in the right direction. Some really good clubs, because I don't have a club. I'm not that guy. But if you say, like I have a couple of private clients who have got specific goals. So those goals typically are, my daughter's 16. She's a senior in the high school. She's going to college next year. So, okay, I will work with that. Or my daughter. It's always my daughter. It's often dads who are looking to protect them. They don't tend to do it for their sons so much for some reason. But it is me. I'm going to Europe, because I think Americans sometimes think that Europe is this like wild place where like the children will be kidnapped and Albanians are gonna like whisk them away.
Yeah, that's all Liam Neeson's fault.
It is. like don't go to Paris because it's incredibly dangerous. Now, that kind of stuff does happen. It does, but it happens in America too. Like human trafficking is just as big here, if not larger than anywhere else. But it tends to be people that have a goal. So they come to me. I'm scared because I've just had a nasty breakup from an abusive partner. I'm scared because my child is about to go away and fly from the nest, and I want them to be prepared. And these are some of the people that I really enjoy training the most are people who don't know anything about combat or firearms in particular, and they want some honest advice, because everyone's very kind of like, oh, you need to get this. And I'm like, okay, don't buy that, because that's not going to work for you. Maybe look at this. So for example, a lot of people ask me, what's the best firearm for home defense? Now, this is my opinion before you get flooded with comments. And I mean, you're going to get flooded with comments. That's okay. But my opinion is that for the average person who is not skilled with firearms, and even with the person who is skilled with firearms, that one of the best home defense firearms you can buy is a PCC, a pistol caliber carbine. So what this does, it's a pistol caliber, so 9mm would be a typical one, but you increase the barrel length, so it's a little bit more powerful. It's a lot more accurate. The ammunition's cheap, so you can train with it, but it's not so powerful that you're shooting the person coming in your house and the neighbor next door and the person in the house after that, because the rounds are just like a big 308, like, boom. You don't need that. Shotguns, they take practice because they have some kick. Handguns take a lot of practice to be accurate with, but a pistol caliber carbine is like the best compromise. It's not the most powerful, it's not the most accurate, but you know, if you're unfamiliar with guns, or you're a little bit scared of guns, or you're worried about recoil or whatever, then you know, those are the sort of things you want to be looking at. So that's the kind of thing that I enjoy, is educating people about the differences between revolvers, semi-automatics, AR-15s, shotguns, pistol caliber carbines, all those kind of things. And I get a lot of people that kind of asking me for training in that regard, and that's always fun to take unskilled people and point them in the right direction, set them along a path where they can really start to appreciate the realisms of what they're embarking upon, because just having a gun is not a panacea. It does not solve all your protection problems. You need to be thinking about where you keep it, how you're going to protect it, how you're going to stop the bad guy taking it, you know, training with it, carrying it. There's all these other options, and people just, you know, when you start sitting them down and explain it to them, like, oh, I never thought about that. So yeah, I enjoy that.
Oh, nice. I think it would be cool to get you on again and do a segment where you're actually going over the differences between them.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, we've got a lot of people listening in the US, but we've also got a lot of people listening all over the world, and especially in countries like the UK and Australia, where there really aren't many guns around. But yeah, I think that would be a cool segment so that people can kind of know the difference.
Great.
What would be your advice for anyone that is looking for a Krav Maga studio, what to kind of look for, so that because you refer them to good studios, so obviously you know what a good studio is, right? But for the average person that's like, oh, I want to take Krav.
So it's this is a hard question to answer, because the martial arts industry, as you know, is unregulated.
Yeah.
So what I'm about to say are generalizations, and there are going to be exceptions to those rules. So generally speaking, you need to look for a Krav Maga class where the instructor has some kind of say background. I'm trying to think how to word that right, because you don't have to have been a doorman or a cop or, you know, UFC fighter to be good at Krav Maga. But what I mean is that when you do your research, you start to kind of find them somewhere, and that could just be. So, for example, there are some organizations where you can go to their website and type in the name of your instructor, and it will bring up their training history. So, for example, Alliance has that, and you can kind of seek them out and see that, oh yeah, you know, they are an accredited Alliance instructor. I don't remember if KMG have started to do something like that, or if Worldwide have something like that. I don't know. All of the major organizations are credible. So IKMF, the International Krav Maga Federation, KMG, Krav Maga Global, Krav Maga Worldwide, Krav Maga Alliance, KMU, obviously. But then you're going to, you know, there's all these little fractions and breakaways and splits. And, you know, personally, I think if you can find a club who focuses on Krav Maga, rather than, so if you're going to something like a family martial arts, who are great, say they do like Taekwondo. So I'll use Taekwondo because I used to train Taekwondo. So let's say you go to a Taekwondo club and they have Krav Maga, which they do maybe twice a week for their adult program.
Right.
You're going to have to kind of look at them a little bit more carefully, because you need to wonder where the instructor learned Krav Maga. Because often, and I say this with some authority because this is kind of how I learned it to start with, is they're doing the host system and they bring in Krav Maga as a bit of a marketing thing, rather than saying, oh, we just do like, self-defense. They say, oh, do Krav Maga. And often what happens is that these instructors go away and they do a weekend of instructor certification, and that'd be like Friday afternoon through to Sunday morning. So it's really only 2 days, maybe 20 hours at a push. And they come away kind of like, okay, now you're a Krav Maga instructor. And what you find is that often they have a glimpse of it, and they're really just doing the host system with like extra aggression and some stress drills. So now that said, you could go to a very good Krav Maga Taekwondo school and they have a very good Krav Maga program. So, don't, just because I'm saying, oh, don't do that. But try and do a little bit of looking into them and see, well, how much Krav Maga have you done? What rank do you hold in Krav Maga? And you notice I say rank and not belt, level, or patch.
Yeah.
Because each system has their own way of categorizing that. Personally, my favorite kind of combination would be a school who market themselves as a Krav Maga school and/or like an MMA gym, and they have a strong sport competition element, which is going to be like a BJJ guy comes in a couple of times a week, or a kickboxing guy comes in a couple of times a week, and maybe a Krav Maga guy comes in, because that your pure Krav Maga who don't do anything but Krav Maga, they often unknowingly let themselves down, because then when they face someone that's actually a good striker or a good grappler, it all goes to pieces, because they've never actually, they think they're pressure testing it because they do stress drills, but they're not. They really need to feel that pressure of someone trying to win, not just someone putting up resistance in a stress drill, but someone who is trying to beat you and is trying to outstrike you. And I find that the two complement each other really well. So if you have the time, if you have the location, and you can get a good Krav Maga school that either is drawing in influences from legit kickboxing and BJJ, or you can attend a couple of, maybe you do 2 Krav Maga classes a week, you do 1 BJJ and one kickboxing, something like that. But not everybody's got the time to do that. So it's hard, because you need, each school's individual. I've been to some schools I've just described who were useless. I've been to some schools that I disrespected earlier, and they were really good. So, but do your research, check them out, find someone who knows a little bit about the school that you're going to. But ultimately, it's are you having a good time? Do you feel that what they're teaching you is relevant and legit? Although that's a slippery slope. I mean, you just have to watch any of Muck Dojo videos and you see some terrifying things that people think is legit. That kind of cultish. My instructor's telling me it works, therefore it must work. And you're like, what are you doing?
Yes, I use all McDojo videos as my training curriculum.
Yes, yeah. There's some crazy stuff out there.
I know.
And people seem to think it's real. I'm like, that won't work.
No. That's some good advice for people looking for a Krav Maga studio. So I want to thank you for being on the show. And like I said, we're going to have to organize what we were talking about there, about the whole gun tutorial thing for people.
That'd be great. I would enjoy doing that. Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we'll figure that out. I think our people would enjoy it, and of course, people have to get to Krav Camp and do some of that those cool scenarios and all that training that you were talking about.
Sure.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being on Krav Life. And so this is Paul Landreth-Smith, and I'm Paul Simos. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.